Welcome back to the channel. My name is Taylor and this is Taylor on TV. So there is this trend going around on TikTok where people are talking about the butterfly effect. And the point is to talk about your personal butterfly effect. The only thing is people are doing the trend wrong. So the butterfly effect is rooted in this, I think it's called a chaos theory or the chaos theory, where even the smallest change, such as something like the flap of a butterfly's wings, can lead to drastically crazy changes, right? So the people on TikTok are describing cause and effect or like a domino effect, or if I hadn't have dropped my salad, my current husband wouldn't have picked it up and we would have never met. That's not the butterfly effect. That's like cause and effect. So since this is a trend on TikTok and everybody's doing it wrong, I figured this is the perfect opportunity for me to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies, The Butterfly Effect. The Butterfly Effect follows a college student named Evan, played by Ashton Kutcher, who is one of the finest men to ever exist on this planet. I don't care what nobody says. I love me some Ashton Kutcher to this day. The Butterfly Effect follows college student Evan, played by Ashton Kutcher, who is afflicted with headaches so painful that he frequently blacks out. While unconscious, Evan is able to travel back in time to difficult moments in his childhood. He can also alter the past. But changing the past can drastically alter the present, and Evan finds himself in nightmarish alternate realities, including one where he's locked away in prison. So I'm getting ready to do a full recap and review of this movie, and at this point in the video, I would recommend you go check it out and tell you where to stream it, but unfortunately, this movie isn't available for streaming, or not for free streaming anyway. I think it is available for rent. It's $3.99 on YouTube, Google Play, Apple TV, Fandango, Amazon Prime, everywhere. It's $3.99. And this is why it's so important to own physical media, because who's paying $3.99 to watch this movie? I know I just said who's paying $3.99 to watch this movie, but honestly, if you have never seen this movie before, it is worth the $3.99. I really love this movie. It's one of my all-time favorites. Definitely rent it if you can, if you're interested in seeing it. But without further ado, let's get into a full recap and review of The Butterfly Effect. Spoilers ahead. So the movie begins with a quote, and I actually don't have the quote on hand. I'm going to put it on the screen, but I believe the quote says something along the lines of, "Something as small as the flap of a butterfly's wings can ultimately cause a typhoon halfway around the world, and that is the theory behind the butterfly effect." So the movie begins with Ashton Kutcher's character named Evan. Evan is being chased. We don't know by what yet, but he barricades himself inside of an office. He has a box full of items, and he hides under the desk in the office, and he writes a note. The message says something along the lines of, "If you're reading this message, then it worked. And just know that everything that I did was to save her." Now remember this scene because it does come back up later on in the movie. After the scene, we get a flashback to 13 years ago where we see a younger Evan, and he's talking to his mother about his father. He's saying that all of his other friends' fathers show up for their events, and he wants to know why his dad can't show up for him. So the mother is trying to explain that it's not safe for his father to be around, and Evan is not understanding this because everybody else has their father. There are people working outside of my house right now, so if you hear all that noise, I'm so sorry. After this very difficult conversation, Evan's mother drops him off at school. She's getting ready to leave the drop-off line when the teacher stops her and says that they want to talk to her about some very concerning things involving Evan. The mother goes into the school and the teacher shows her some artwork. The class had an assignment to draw what they want to be when they get older. Most kids drew things like an astronaut, normal things that kids want to be. But Evan drew this very disturbing picture of him holding a knife, standing over people's bodies. And in hindsight, I just realized what that drawing is. It's going to come back up later. Oh my gosh. Okay. So what's even more alarming than the drawings is the fact that Evan doesn't remember drawing it. This prompts the mother to take him to Sunnyvale Institution, which is like a mental facility of sorts. So they put Evan in a machine to do a scan of his head, and the mother is talking to a doctor about if it's possible for Evan to have inherited his father's illness. So now we are learning that Evan's father has some sort of mental illness. After this appointment, they move on with life as usual, and I believe they've instructed Evan to start writing down his thoughts in a journal. So One morning, they are in the kitchen, and Evan is writing in his journal about a play date that is getting ready to happen. He is getting ready to have a play date with siblings Kaylee and Tommy. And he's excited because they're spending the day with Kaylee and Tommy's father. Evan does not have his own father to hang out with, so he's excited for this play date. Now, the mother leaves the kitchen, but by the time she comes back, Evan is standing there with a butcher knife. Evan is in this trance, and when he snaps out of the trance, he does not remember what happened. He doesn't remember grabbing the knife. This is very alarming, but instead of addressing this situation, Evan's mother sends him on the play date to Kaylee and Tommy's house. I would think if my kid was displaying these kind of signs and my kid was standing in the kitchen with a knife before a play date, you're not going to nobody's house. I need to figure out what's wrong with you before I send you to anybody's house, because this is a bit much. Now, when they arrive at Tommy and Kaylee's house, their father is waiting at the front yard for Evan, and he greets the mother and he takes Evan saying, "Oh, it's going to be such a happy play date." Red flag. This is a red flag to me, because why are you greeting my child? Where are the kids? Where are the children? Now, I remember the first time I saw this, I thought it was weird because I didn't see the kids and I thought the kids were going to be not home. No, it's worse. It's red flags for other reasons. So the father takes Evan around the back of the house. And at the back of the house, we see Kaylee and Tommy, and they're dressed up in these like Peter Pan costumes, I believe. Now, their father has recently purchased a video camera. And you know where this is headed. It's so icky. So the father explains that they're going to film a movie today and that Kaylee and Evan are going to be the main characters of the movie. Tommy is upset because he was promised that he could be the main character of the movie. And the dad scolds him, telling him that it's not about him today. So after the dad explains what is going to be happening in the movie, or, what is going to be needed from Evan, Evan blacks out. And the next thing we see is he's in the basement with Kaylee. Both of them are standing in front of the dad's video camera. It appears that both of them don't have shirts on. And the dad is drinking while recording them. And we can kind of put two and two together about what's happening in this moment. Since Evan has blacked out, he's looking around confused, not understanding what happened. The whole situation, whatever has happened, he was blacked out during it. And this infuriates the father because he thinks that Evan is pretending not to remember what happened, and he's telling Evan to shut up. Now, while the dad is yelling, Tommy is actually sitting on the steps watching all of this play out. Who knows if he watched all of this abuse or not, but he is holding on to this baby doll and he is twisting its head off. So we know that there is some anger, there is some trauma, there is things brewing within Tommy's little baby body that shouldn't be there. It's uncomfortable. The whole scene is uncomfortable. It's sad. So fast forward, we're back at the mental facility where Evan was getting some testing done, and the doctor speculates that Evan's blackouts could be caused by stress. So the doctor recommends that Evan should be allowed to meet his father to kind of alleviate some of that stress, or to kind of, help the kid along, help him cope with not having a father. At least he gets to meet him. So it's another day, and Evan is getting ready to meet his father, and he's very excited about it. In fact, he writes about it in his journal. So they go back to the Sunnyvale institution, and this time, instead of like the medical side of the building, they're going to a side that houses the mental patients. And this is where Evan's father is. So Evan goes to a holding room where he is waiting on his father. He's finally going to meet his dad. When I first saw this scene, I thought it was inappropriate. I don't think that I would introduce my child to their father in this setting. I feel like if he's already having trauma or things triggered related to the father, I don't think meeting your father in a psych ward would be the best thing to help him. Okay, I just don't think it's a good idea. Especially when the father finally comes into the room, he's like handcuffed. So even meeting your own child, you're not trusted to be unattended. You're not trusted. Like, clearly there's a lot mentally wrong with this man. And you put your child in this situation to meet him and you're not in the room. The writing is on the wall. It just seems like this man was not mentally stable to meet his child. And I think it was a bad idea for the mother to allow this to happen, right? And I was right, because Evan blacks out during the meeting, and when he comes back to, his dad is strangling him. How traumatizing. You know, you're already struggling with this. This is not what this child needed in this moment. In order to protect Evan from his father, the security in the room ends up hitting him in the head, hitting the father in the head. And we actually see the father hit the ground, and there's like blood pooling around his head. And it turns out that that blow was actually a fatal blow, because in the next scene, Evan is now at his father's funeral. And like I said, I don't think this is healthy for Evan at all. None of this should have been happening. And now he's witnessing, or he has witnessed, his father dying in front of him. So we fast forward 6 years later, and we see a teenage version of Evan, Kaylee, and Tommy, and they now have a new friend named Lenny. Now they are all in Tommy and Kaylee's basement smoking cigarettes when suddenly Tommy finds a single stick of dynamite, and he gets the bright idea to go put this stick of dynamite in a neighbor's mailbox. So the four friends are standing in the woods across from a house, and through bullying, Tommy convinces Lenny that he has to be the one to put the dynamite inside of the mailbox. Lenny goes and puts the dynamite in the mailbox and comes back, and they're waiting for the big kaboom. Now, Evan is holding his hands over Kaylee's ears. It's a little cute gesture. It's very clear that they like each other. And Tommy notices this, and he gets a little bit angry. We see him look over in disgust at the two of them being all cutesy. Now, they're waiting for the dynamite to go kaboom when all of a sudden Evan blacks out, and we are no longer standing in the tree line across from the house. We are now in the woods following the kids running away. Evan and Tommy are carrying Lenny. Lenny seems to be blacked out or like in a state of shock, and we still don't know what happened. So the kids get Lenny back to safety. Lenny is in the back of an ambulance because he is so shell shocked. So Evan's mother arrives on the scene, and she wants to know what happened with Lenny. Why is he in this state of shock? But Evan reveals that he blacked out and he doesn't remember anything, and he's very distressed by this. So we are now learning that even years later, Evan is still being affected by these blackouts. So when he gets home, he is writing in his journal about the day's events. Even though he doesn't remember, he's still writing down the pieces that he does remember. His pen runs out of ink, and he goes to find another ink pen, and he finds a box with his father's belongings in them. And inside of this box, he sees a death certificate for his grandfather. And the death certificate mentions that the grandfather actually has the same tendencies as Evan. So this is a generational thing. Evan and his mother go back to Sunnyvale Institute where they talk to the doctor, and the doctor suggests trying hypnosis to see if this can help Evan remember the pieces of his memories that were blacked out. The doctor tells Evan that these are his memories. He can rewind them, he can fast forward them, slow them down, pause them, anything that he wants to do because he owns these memories. So he goes back to the moment where he's covering Kaylee's ears before the dynamite goes off. And he's trying to remember what happens, and we get some glimpses of a car coming down the street now. But after he remembers this, Evan starts convulsing. His eyes are rolling into the back of his head, and this is when his nose starts to bleed, and it's very violent. It looks like he's having a seizure. So the doctor begins to count Evan down from the hypnosis to try to snap him out of it. When he finally comes to, he doesn't remember any of this. He wants to know, did the hypnosis work? So this is our first little glimpse of the idea that Evan can kind of go back into his memories and see things that he thought he forgot about. In the next scene, Evan is being dropped off at the movie theaters with Kaylee and Tommy, and they're going to see, I think it's the movie Seven with Morgan Freeman in it. And she looks sad. And the brother kind of yells at her, like, stop looking so sad. Like, he's very mean. And they go into the theater, and while the movie is going on, the brother is still being reckless. He's screaming at the screen. He's disturbing the peace in the movie theater, and it's upsetting Kaylee so bad that she actually leaves. Evan follows out behind her, and they talk about what happened. Kaylee is very upset by a lot of things in her life, and Evan tries to console her. And when he does, he touches her shoulder, and we find out that she has a bruise on her arm, presumably from her dad. And so she's still being abused by her father. Evan consoles her, and eventually they lean in and have a kiss. And as they are kissing, Tommy comes out of the theater and sees the two of them, and this sets him off. As he is yelling at them and trying to approach them to stop them from kissing, there are some older kids or maybe even young adults in the theater, and they trip Tommy on his way to separate Evan and his sister. Tommy then gets up and he takes this metal pole that was standing next to the person that trips him, and he hits the person in the face with it and then proceeds to beat up this much bigger person. All the while he's looking at Evan, kind of like a threat, like, I could be doing this to you right now. And then the police come and they drag Tommy out of the theater. In the next scene, we see Evan's mother. She is standing in the kitchen, and I believe she's learning what could have happened that day at the mailbox, because there is a news report about a stick of dynamite going off in someone's mailbox and harming the person who lives at the house. So after she hears what happened on the news, this is when Evan's mother decides that it's time for them to move away from this city. So they are planning a move to give Evan a fresh start. So in the days after this, Evan and Kaylee are hanging out outside, and while they're outside, they see Lenny being brought home, presumably from the mental institute. So they go over to Lenny's house and ask if he could play or ask if he can come outside and hang out. And Lenny, Kaylee, and Evan are all going on a walk. Now, as they're going on a walk and they're talking to Lenny, he's getting better, they stumble across this junkyard area. There's like a bunch of cars, scrap metal, all kinds of things here, just junk. And here is where we see Tommy, and he has a fire going. And next to the fire is a burlap sack, and it's moving. And from what the sounds are, we can tell that it is a dog inside of the burlap sack. And he's pouring gasoline on top of the sack, about to put the dog over the flame. Before we can see anything horrible happen, Evan blacks out. And when Evan comes to, he is banged up. His nose is bloody. Kaylee is beside him crying, and the burlap sack has been burned. Lenny is also next to the burlap sack, looking shocked. He just came back from getting better, and now this incident happens the day he gets back. This is so traumatizing. I can't even imagine. But Evan is traumatized by this as well, because the dog in the sack was actually Evan's dog. So this is very horrible. I hate watching this scene. In the next scene, we see a U-Haul being driven away by Evan's mother. Evan is in the passenger seat and Kaylee is running behind it. Evan writes her a note claiming that he will come back for her. And the U-Haul drives away, leaving Kaylee standing in this town alone. Well, not alone. She has her crazy brother and her abusive father, so she might as well be alone. She would be better off alone. We get another time jump, and it is now 7 years later, and Evan is in college. And let me just say, Ashton Kutcher in this scene, Ashton Kutcher in this era of life, Ashton Kutcher in this era of movies, this is the finest man. I had the biggest crush on Ashton Kutcher. And then in this movie, he got a little earring in. So it's 7 years later, Evan is back in college, presumably for psychology or something to do with memories. That's what he's studying. In fact, he even has pet worms, and he says that studying the pet worms' memories could help him further understand the human memory, or how the human memories work. So we meet Evan's roommate, Thumper, and Thumper is played by Evan Supley, and I think everybody should recognize him from Remember the Titans. He's been in a lot of other things, but recently he has had a major weight loss. So he looks super different now, and I'm so happy for him and this new lifestyle. Evan and Thumper decide to go out to a bar to celebrate the fact that Evan has not had a blackout in 7 years. This is a 7-year time jump from the moment in the U-Haul. So to me, it sounds like he might not have had a blackout ever since he left that town, or left Kaylee and Tommy behind. So I find that to be very interesting. After they celebrate at the bar, Evan brings a girl back to his room, and the girl looks under his mattress for some reason, and she finds his composition notebooks, and she requests that Evan reads her parts of his journal. This is a weird thing to request, especially when trying to hook up with somebody. I'm not trying to read your journal. Evan complies, and he reads an excerpt of his journal, and it's actually the moment where he is in the junkyard and the dog is about to be set on fire. So we get to see this scene actually play out in its entirety now. Evan does try to save his dog, but ends up getting beat up by Tommy. Lenny tries to save the dog as well, but Tommy has some choice words for Lenny, and Lenny just gives up and just sits there defeated. Evan has blacked out while replaying this memory. When he wakes up, he is back in the room with the girl. So after going back in time or going back through this memory, he decides that he wants to pay Lenny a visit. And he goes back to town and visits Lenny. And Lenny actually seems kind of delayed. He still plays with planes the same way he did as a kid. He even still has his race car bed, which is very childish. Lenny then begins to repeat a lot of the mean, negative phrases that Tommy used to say to him. He even pushes Evan against the wall, and his whole energy just feels like him replaying all of the bad things that Tommy had did to them. So Evan goes back to his dorms and he reads some more of his journal entries. The entry that he reads next is the one where they are standing across from the house waiting for the dynamite to explode. Now, as he's standing there, he was originally smoking a cigarette, holding it with his mouth as he's putting his hands over Kaylee's ears. Now that he's remembering things, the cigarette drops out of his mouth and it rests on his shirt so long that it burns a hole through the shirt and burns his stomach as well. So the scene now plays out in its entirety. We see a woman coming home for the day, and she is holding a fresh baby. Like, this baby couldn't have been more than like 2 months old, 2, 3 months old. It's a little baby. The mother goes to check the mailbox, and the baby actually reaches to lift the lid of the mailbox, and that's when the dynamite goes off. There's literally an infant baby in this situation, and that is why Lenny is so traumatized in this scene. And that's why they had to carry him into the woods. Can you imagine? Don't imagine. I don't want to imagine. So when Evan wakes up from this memory, he notices that he has a new burn mark on his stomach. The burn mark caused by him dropping the cigarette on his shirt, which is something that hadn't happened before until he's now remembering it. So Evan goes to dinner with his mother, and at dinner he asks his mother if his father ever experienced things like changing memories or, thinking that he can remember things differently. And the mother says that the father actually did come up with a similar concept around the same age that Evan is now. She doesn't want to talk about it much, but basically the father and Evan have similar abilities to go back in time and remember things differently. After dinner, Evan and his mother go to a psychic, and the psychic reveals that Evan does not have a lifeline, that Evan was not supposed to exist. And it's really creepy. The mother gets upset, and we find out the mother got upset because before Evan, she has had multiple stillbirths. She has lost so many babies before Evan, and Evan is her miracle baby. So to hear someone say that Evan wasn't supposed to exist, that kind of hits home for her. The next day or so, Evan goes to visit Kaylee, where he finds out where she is, and she's working in a diner. He waits for Kaylee to get off work, and he wants to have a conversation with her about their past. She wants to know why Evan would just pop back up into her life, not to say hello, not to catch up. The first thing you want to ask her about is one of the most traumatic things she probably experienced. And she goes off on him. She wants to know why he never came back for her. And she's upset, and she runs off into the night. The next thing we know, we are back in Evan's dorm room, and he is checking his voicemails. And there's a voicemail from Tommy. And Tommy is talking about how Kaylee ended up taking her own life, and he wants to know what Evan said to her to upset her that bad. So the next scene is Kaylee's funeral, and we see the grown-up version of Tommy, and Tommy is played by William Lee Scott. He has also been in a lot of things, but I recognize him most from being Bullethead in the Steve Harvey Show. Evan is grieving the loss of Kaylee, and he's kind of thinking things over, and he realizes if he could read his journal, travel back to a memory, and change the current timeline to put a cigarette burn on his stomach, then maybe he can go back to a journal entry memory and change things to bring Kaylee back. I forgot to mention, when he met up with Kaylee after her shift at the diner, Kaylee explained that Tommy went to juvie. Her dad was still abusive, so much so that she emancipated herself at 15. So Evan's idea is to go back to this day to kind of fix Kaylee's life. It seems like this moment in the basement with the camcorder is what sent her life down a dark path. So Evan goes back in time, and he's still a little kid, but it seems like he has his adult consciousness because he tells Kaylee to cover her ears. When he tells Kaylee to cover her ears, he tells the dad off like a grown man would. He tells him that he needs to stop touching his daughter. He needs to stop doing this creepy shit to the daughter. And matter of fact, you need to discipline your little boy because he seems to be having a lot of anger issues. There's a lot wrong with him. You know, we see that Tommy grows up to burn dogs alive in bags and beat people up in a movie theater. So Evan's idea is to get the daddy off of Kaylee and stop being a nasty freak with this camera. And how about you discipline your son? So he does all of this, and then he goes back to the current timeline. Now, every time Evan goes back, he seems to be changing things, and that's when he has those nosebleeds or those seizure-like episodes. So his nose is bleeding, and he's kind of like having a difficult time after waking up from this memory. And that's because all of the new memories have to be implanted in his mind. So we see this little montage of him and Kaylee having happy times. You know, they're together. Things seem to be so much better than what they were. We learn that Evan has woken up in a sorority bedroom. It's Kaylee's sorority bedroom, and she's laying in the bed beside him, as beautiful as ever. She looks so cute. And he has effectively changed the timeline. Everything in this world is different, even his haircut. I think he even has like different facial hair. He's like this preppy guy. He's a part of a fraternity. I think he even runs into his old roommate, the gothic guy. Him and the gothic guy are no longer friends. So he's done it. He's changed the timeline for the better. Him and Kaylee are together. They're happy. They're healthy. They seem like everything is going right. Evan goes to class and he starts to talk to his teacher. Now, in the original timeline, Evan has a friendly relationship with this teacher. But in this timeline, the teacher has no idea who Evan is. And he tells him to just sit down and get ready for the test. Evan sits down for the test and he is approached by someone wearing like fraternity merch or like someone who is in this specific fraternity. And Evan looks down and he realizes he also is wearing the same frat stuff. So Evan can infer that this is probably a bro, like a friend. The guy sits down and he hands Evan some answers for the test, and Evan is kind of looking at them like, okay. And I think this is supposed to signify that in the main timeline, Evan doesn't need to cheat for a test. He understands the subject matter. But in this timeline, this Evan isn't so smart, or this Evan doesn't focus on, his academic side of college. Before the test starts, Evan throws away the answers and he asks the guy if he could help him set up something for Kaylee. He wants to do a romantic gesture for her. And the guy says, I'm not going to help you, but we have plenty of pledges that could help you. So in the next scene, we see Evan and he is talking to these pledges and they're in the process of being hazed or, going through the process of joining the frat. So they're going to do whatever Evan says. So Evan is in front of the pledges and he asks one of them to recite the Greek alphabet. And when the pledge can't do it, Evan does it himself. He just starts rattling off the Greek alphabet. And then he says some rather mean things to the pledge. And Evan looks shocked, almost as if he didn't say it or like, where did he get that knowledge of the Greek alphabet from? It's like, this is who he is in this reality, and it kind of jumped out. So he feels bad for how mean he was to the pledge, and he tells the pledge that he can go, take a shower. And he starts being nice to the guy because that's who Evan truly is in the original timeline. In this timeline, he seems like he's probably a jerk. So later that evening, the romantic gesture that he wanted to set up for Kaylee is happening. He invites her to the frat house, and there's like this nice little dinner set up. It's a really romantic evening, and he's telling Kaylee that he wants to spend the rest of his life with her. Their romantic moment is interrupted because somebody has vandalized Evan's car in front of the frat house. Nobody knows who it is until they see a dog collar hanging up on the rearview mirror. It's Tommy. So come to find out, Tommy has been in juvie this whole time, and he just got out maybe 2 weeks ago, and Kaylee never said anything to give Evan a heads up. Kaylee says that Tommy deserves some grace because he was abused when they were growing up. Their father abused Tommy heavily. The father never did anything to Kaylee, but took all of his anger and abuse out on Tommy. And this was directly caused by when Evan went back to the memory and told the daddy to never touch Kaylee again, but you need to discipline your son because your son has some anger issues. That's why all of this is happening now. So Evan is trying to be affectionate with Kaylee, but she realizes that Tommy could be watching somewhere from the distance, and she actually tells her boyfriend that he can't like hold her hand or do anything because her brother might be watching. Kaylee is talking to Evan about how weird he has been lately. So, like I said, when he was with the frats, that's probably who he is normally in this timeline. She says he walks differently, he talks differently, everything about him is just off. Even the gesture of making this romantic evening is not like him. Pretty much, it seems like this version of Evan hasn't gone through like losing Kaylee. He's been there with him since childhood, so he doesn't have this great appreciation for her the way that this version of Evan does. So, of course, he's probably not going to do all these romantic things, you know? So, as they're walking back across campus, that's when Tommy appears and he has like this metal bat. And he says some weird stuff like, "You got a pretty hot chick. My sister's pretty hot, if I don't say so myself." And then he's upset that Evan is with his sister because she's the only one that understands him or sees him as a person and not a monster. So Tommy proceeds to beat up Evan, and then Evan gets the upper hand and starts beating up Tommy. And Kaylee is telling Evan to stop because Evan is hurting Tommy, as if Tommy wasn't just hitting Evan first. Now remember, Evan has all of this built up animosity from Tommy killing his dog, Tommy, doing all these horrible things. So he has all this anger built up, and Evan ends up killing Tommy in this timeline. And Evan ends up going to jail. Now, I don't know why, or maybe this is just how the system works. He has to sit in jail for a while or sit in prison for a while. But I feel like this whole scene was self-defense. This man attacked me with a metal bat, and because I defended myself, I have to go to prison? So when Evan gets to prison, he has a cellmate named Carlos. Carlos kind of takes care of Evan. When people are bullying him and taking his food, Carlos gives him the food off of his own plate. He's a very kind cellmate. Evan gets to meet his mother, and he asks his mother to bring him some journals. So once Evan gets his journals back inside the prison, he is approached by some other prisoners, and they are not so nice. They say a lot of disgusting, derogatory things. You know, the kind of things that happen in prison. They take Evan's journals and they read them aloud. And so Evan feels kind of defeated. One day he's sitting beside Carlos and he notices that Carlos has some religious tattoos, and he tells Carlos that he believes that God sent him to this cell with Carlos because Carlos can help him escape or help him with his situation. So when the prisoners took Evan's notebook from him, he was holding on to them so tight, but when they snatched it away, he ended up holding on to a few pages. So Evan is now going to use these few pages to prove to Carlos what he can do and how he can help him. So he reads the page in front of Carlos to go back to a memory. And this memory is of the day where he was in school. The specific day is when Evan has the assignment to draw what he wants to be when he gets older. This is when Evan draws that disturbing picture. After he draws the disturbing picture, he gets up and he puts his hands over these two needles, and he slams his hands down on the needles. So now in real time, back in our timeline, he has these scars in the palm of his hands, and he shows Carlos that the scars are forming. And they kind of look like the same scars that Jesus might have from being nailed to the cross. So Carlos is sold, and he now wants to help Evan execute his plan. So in the next scene, Evan goes to the cell of the prisoners who took his journals. Now, remember I told you that these prisoners said some very gross things. They told Evan that he needs to perform a certain act to get his stuff back. So Evan goes to the cell pretending to be ready to perform said act. When Evan gets down on his knees in front of the prisoners, he actually pulls out a shank or some kind of sharp object, and he stabs the two prisoners. And that's when Carlos comes in to hold the cell shut to stop the other prisoners from coming in to attack Evan. Evan now has a small window of time to crack open one of his journals and transport back to a different memory. Now I want to stop here because I want to point something out that I just noticed when I made this video. When Evan was a kid and he drew that disturbing picture, it was actually the scene of Evan in the prison shanking the two men. So when Evan traveled back in time to prove a point to Carlos, this was the moment that he was in prison. And remember, he said he doesn't remember drawing the picture. He doesn't remember drawing the picture because that was Evan from the future, going back to the memory. I never noticed that until now. That's crazy. So while Carlos is holding the cell door shut and Evan is transporting back to another memory, he ends up at the memory. We're back at the junkyard. Before they get to the junkyard, Evan hands Lenny this sharp piece of metal and tells him what's about to happen. He says, you're going to need this sharp piece of metal to get us out of this situation that we're about to get in. I need you to trust me. So they go back through the whole instance of Tommy getting ready to burn the dog. Somehow, Evan successfully talks him out of harming the dog. So Tommy takes the dog out of the bag. Everything seems to be going well. And then Lenny comes out of nowhere and kills Tommy with the metal shard that Evan gave him. So now we're transported to a new timeline where Lenny was locked away in like this facility and Tommy is no longer here. He died that day in the junkyard, and Kaylee has gone down a completely different destructive path. There are so many things that have been changed in this timeline that it appears that Evan is having a full-blown seizure. He's corrected some things to the point where he has his roommate Thumper again, and Thumper actually calls 911 to get Evan some help. So we're back in the mental facility, and Evan is getting some more brain scans, and he's not really listening to what's happening. Instead, he steals a swipe card from the doctor who's explaining things to him, and he ends up going to the mental side of the facility to visit Lenny. Now remember, since Lenny killed Tommy that day at the junkyard, he's been locked away for all this time. Lenny is not happy to see Evan. In fact, he blames him for everything that happened that day. He feels like Evan set him up that day. Like, why did you hand me that metal shard? You knew something bad was going to happen. So Evan is upset by the outcome of this timeline, and he cracks open his journals to go speak to his dad again that day he visited him. This time we get to see what happened, the interaction between him and his dad. Now, in this scene, since he's reading his notebooks and traveling back to the memory, the Evan that is talking to the father is the adult consciousness version of Evan, and the father recognizes that. You know, they're talking from the perspective of Evan being this man in college. So the father understands that Evan is now, you know, walking back through memories and changing the past. And the father is telling Evan, you should not be doing this because every time you go back and try to change something, something bad is going to happen in your reality. You can't play God. And this actually needs to end today. And that is why the father came across the table to try to kill Evan. So in this moment, I'm starting to realize something about this movie that I've never realized. All of the scenes where Evan blacks out are all scenes where he goes back and he changes something and things just aren't adding up. So like in the beginning, we're thinking, oh, your dad is unhinged and he's strangling you for no reason. No, your dad is strangling you because you're talking to him from the future. You're effectively changing the timeline. All these bad things that are happening is an effect. It's like, it's literally a loop and it's blowing my mind. Everything bad that has happened, like your dad choking you, is because you decided to come back and speak to your dad as an adult through your child body. If you have never done that, your dad wouldn't have choked you that day. So this is actually my first time watching the butterfly effect as an adult. So all of these things are kind of clicking for me. So if you've seen this movie and you're thinking I'm slow for not catching these things before, I was a child when I first watched this movie. So after this memory happens with the father, back in our main timeline, Evan goes to find Kaylee. And in this timeline, Kaylee is staying in like this motel or like this rundown apartment, and she's actually a working girl. She is selling her body for money. I believe she is doing drugs, hardcore drugs, and it's just not the best place for Kaylee to be. It's actually the worst outcome for Kaylee so far. They go to a diner and they're eating, and Evan explains to her what is happening with the timelines and how he can go back and change things. And he even says things to her to prove, like, I've known you in separate timelines. If I didn't know you, I wouldn't know all of these random things about you. I think he says stuff like he knows she prefers the smell of skunk over flowers, or her toes go numb when she orgasms. That's not something that she would talk to a client about. Like, who else would know that about you but me? Because I've been with you in other timelines. So she's kind of starting to believe it because all of these things are things that he could not have known. But then it upsets her. And she says, if you can go back and if you could change things, then how about you go back and you change the day that these things happened to me in front of that camera with my dad? How about you go back and you change my brother not being here? So in this timeline, the camcorder incident still happened. Tommy is gone. It's just not a good timeline for her. So then Evan has this pity party, and he's like, every time I try to help someone, everything ends up bad. Didn't your daddy just tell you? Like, you know that you're not supposed to be making these changes. Your dad just told you this, but you want to have a pity party. These kind of movies always upset me. Quite literally, the timeline where him and Kaylee are like in a fraternity and sorority, that timeline is pretty good. Everybody is straight in that timeline. The only problem is Tommy isn't well off. And I feel like that could be fixed as well. Like, go back and tell the father off about everything. Or even if Tommy does stay a bad seed, instead of killing him that night on campus, call the police. I don't know. I feel like going back to that timeline, you have some material to work with that wasn't so bad. But I get this is a movie and you have to do everything for the plot, so that's not going to happen. So Evan goes back to his journals and he decides to go back to the day where the dynamite is placed in the mailbox. He decides to try to stop it. Tommy runs across the street and he tackles the woman and her baby, saving them from the explosion. But Evan is standing right there in front of the mailbox when it explodes, and that's when he wakes up in a new timeline. Evan wakes up and he looks over and he's in a dorm room, and Lenny is actually in the bed beside him. So he is happy with this timeline because it appears that Lenny is all right. Evan is happy and he goes to stretch for the morning. And that's when we see that Evan does not have any arms, or he doesn't have like from the forearm down. If the explosion was that strong to blow his limbs off, then you would think there would be some damage all up and through here too. But it's just limbs. So since the timeline has changed so drastically, we have to go back through and implant some new memories. And that's when Evan has another, seizure-like episode. And as we're seeing these memories go by, we see that Kaylee and Lenny are together. So Kaylee was actually in the bed with Lenny, and her and Lenny are now assisting Evan through this episode that he's having. They wheel him out of the room. They're getting ready to take him to the emergency room to see what's up with him. He talks them out of it by throwing himself in the floor out of his wheelchair and playing like the pity card, like, don't take me to the emergency room. I've been through enough. This whole timeline, it's not meant to be funny, but it is funny to me because why did you throw yourself out of the chair like that? So once they get him outside in the wheelchair, he's like really pale. And then his hairstyle, is that supposed to be like a feel sorry for me hairstyle? Like the way it's like swooped over. And then there's even a scene where Kaylee tries to give him a granola bar and he crushes it in his hands because his hands don't work well. Like, it's not meant to be funny, but it's very comedic to me. And I know it shouldn't be. I know I'm a terrible person. Anyways, in this timeline, Tommy is actually very religious. And it turns out the day that he saved the lady and her baby, he found God. And this kind of pisses Evan off because it's like, what do you mean he found God? In every other timeline, he's the damn devil. And in this timeline, y'all are acting like he's so sweet. But Evan knows fully what Tommy is capable of in other timelines. So he's like, what the hell? Another thing in this timeline, Kaylee is with Lenny, and Evan obviously doesn't like that. And he talks to Kaylee about what happened between him and her and if they could ever be a thing again. And in short, no. Kaylee is with Lenny and Evan has no chance in hell to be with her. So it seems like everybody is better off in this timeline. Everything is good. So Evan goes to his dorm room and he attempts to drown himself to end his misery because everybody else is happy. So Tommy ends up saving Evan from drowning himself. And in the next scene, we learn that Evan's mother is sick in the hospital. She has cancer, I believe. Throughout the movie, we see Evan's mom smoking on and off. Depending on the timeline, she smokes like when she's upset. Turns out in this timeline, because Evan got blown up at the mailbox, it caused her to start smoking more. And this is why she's in the hospital sick in this timeline. All of his friends are good, but his mother's not good. So he still has to fix things. But in this timeline, he doesn't have as many journal entries to go off of because remember, his arms got blown off. So he hasn't been writing his journal entries like he did in the other timelines, so he only has a few journal entries to go off of. So back in the dorm, he asked Lenny to go through all of his belongings and find his journal entries, and eventually they find a notebook. So the only journal entry he has is the one with the day he gets ready to go to Tommy and Kaylee's house with the daddy. This time, when he goes to the house, instead of telling the daddy off and going back to that good timeline like he did the first time, he decides to find the stick of dynamite in the basement. Because remember, the dynamite does come from this basement after all. He finds the dynamite, he lights it, and he threatens the dad with it. But the dad swats the dynamite away and it rolls at Kaylee's feet. Kaylee picks up the dynamite, and this sets off a whole new timeline, a timeline where Kaylee died from that dynamite. So due to Evan's actions, picking up that stick of dynamite, lighting it, and Kaylee dying because of it, he is sent to the mental facility where his dad is, and he has been locked up since he has been a kid. Now, Evan goes up to the doctor that he's been dealing with this whole time, and he asks the doctor to give him his notebooks. And the doctor says there are no notebooks. You have been in this mental facility your whole life, or since you've been a kid, and you keep asking about these notebooks and they don't exist. So now at this point in the movie, you're kind of looking sideways like, is this whole movie from the perspective of him in a mental facility? Like, did none of this ever happen? And I think that's kind of what they want you to think, but they kind of bring it back home. So instead of the notebooks, Evan asked his mother to bring some of his home movies, or some of the home movies that she used to make when he was younger. The mother brings the home movies in a box, and that is where we get the beginning of the movie. Remember, in the beginning, Evan is running around this hospital with a box full of things, and he barricades himself inside of an office. What he ends up doing is projecting the movies on the wall. And he doesn't have to use his notes to go back to a memory. He can use a video. And so he uses the home videos to transport back in time. Now, this movie actually has two different endings. One ending, Evan transports back to a birthday party where he's standing beside Kaylee, and he whispers in Kaylee's ear to never talk to him again, stay away from him, and he hates her. And this effectively gives Kaylee like a different life entirely where Evan is not involved. Now, there is another ending. I believe this may be the director's ending. I don't know which is which. So in this alternate ending, Evan is watching the home video of his mother giving birth to him. And since he is in the womb in this video, he can transport himself back to that memory of him being inside of his mother. And he decides to wrap the umbilical cord around his neck, ending his life before it even began. So remember, his mother said that she had so many stillbirths before him. Well, he just added another one on top of that. At the end of the movie, we get a montage to see how everybody's life is going now that Evan is no longer in the picture. Tommy and Kaylee get to go live with their mom and their stepdad, and it appears that they have a happier life. Lenny also seems to have a very happy life. Evan's mother looks like she has a daughter with a new man. We also see that Kaylee ends up getting married. Basically, everybody gets a happy ending except for Evan, and I think that is incredibly sad. And that is the end of The Butterfly Effect. Hopefully, I did this movie justice. If you guys haven't seen it, it's one of the best movies that I've ever seen. I feel like it doesn't get the credit that it deserves. It's one of my favorite movies for sure. And I'm so glad I got to make this video on the butterfly effect. Comment down below if you guys have any butterfly effect style stories. I would love to read them. That is the end of this video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.